Good afternoon, everyone. Pastor Mark here at Church of the Pines, and we just finished up our first session of our January Bible study, Parable Remix Volume 2, where we take a look at some of Jesus's most familiar parables and look and think about them in fresh and new ways to see what God has to speak to us about them in ways that we might not have before. And this today we can't do that.
All right. Well, Happy New Year and good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to our first Bible study of the new year. We're going to do Parable Remix Volume 2. I like clever names. But last year, a lot of people said that they really enjoyed our first looking at parables in a new and different way. And so we looked at some unfamiliar parables last session. So this month we're going to take a look at some of Jesus's more well-known parables and kind of think about them and and ask ourselves some questions about how we might understand these parables in new and different ways than what we might have before. One of the dangers with a very familiar passage is just to think whatever that familiar understanding is to think about that's the thing. And we're going to actually see today a little bit that can be dangerous. Not dangerous, but that can cause us to miss out on a whole lot more that God might want to have us work with and wrestle with about something. So that's what we're going to be doing the next few weeks. And I thank everyone for signing up and getting their name tags, although I think we know each other's names right now, or might need new glasses because I can't read Sarah's name tag from here. And we'll be doing things. We just want to also just remind us that when we're done with our sessions, to leave your name tags in the basket on the table. If you have already filled up your little notebook, or you didn't get a notebook, you don't have one, we've got plenty of little notebooks that you can use to take notes, and as you think of things and do reading on your own, that you can take as well. And as we're getting started, I want to just talk just a moment about the study we're going to be offering after this one, for our Lent study. As hopefully most all of you have heard me talk about, we have developed a mission, a new vision and mission, and a mission focus for our congregation starting this year, 2024, and for the next 4 years, which is to increase the food security of people in our community. Yeah, it might have been yours, but I'm going to remind to shut mine off. That increase the food security for people in our community and throughout the world. And we've got a wide range of things about that. But one of the first things that we want to do is just help us learn about what do you mean when you talk food security. And there's a great resource put out by the Wisconsin Council of Churches called Hunger at Our Doorstep, which is, this is my binder that I've been working on, which is a wonderful study for congregations that want to learn more, want to be active in a wide variety of ways of trying to increase food security for people, not only in our communities, but throughout the world. So we're going to be offering that throughout Lent on Thursdays at noon. And so we'll have more information about that. But Mary says she does have a sign-up sheet and information about the class on the table over there. So we want, our goal is throughout this year is to have the whole congregation, majority of the congregation, attend a session of Hunger at the Doorstep. So this will be our first offering, but I would encourage everyone who can to be a part of that, since we do that.
Is there a fee for
Nope.
the notebook? Oh.
No, there's not.
That's the
This is this is the leaders' material. Mm-hmm. There are handouts and information that you will receive in the class that are 100% free. the Wisconsin Council of Churches has produced this, and it's really good, and it's completely free. So it costs us like half a cent to print a page. So there's no cost to anybody. So there's nothing to order. So all right, with that, we'll start with our look at a parable this week, and we're going to be taking a look at the parable of the prodigal son. That's the one we'll be looking at, talking about. We're going to look at the version of that in Luke chapter 15, verses 11 through 32. So just give you a second to find that, and then we'll start in prayer. Let me pray for us today. Oh, Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this good day and for this time that we have to gather together to study your word, to study this parable that Jesus spoke to people thousands of years ago and that still rings in our ears, in our understanding today, that is familiar, that people who might not even really know you have heard this parable and have heard a meaning of it. God, we come today open to your Spirit with us, to hear what you have to share with us, to challenge us, and to help us grow closer to you and one another. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, so Luke 15, verses 11 through 32 will be our parable. But before we read it, I wonder, how familiar are you with this? Have you heard this parable before? Yeah, what happens in it? Someone give me a quick summary of this parable.
Well, I guess he's the younger son, wanted an inheritance ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so his father gave it to him, and he went and spent it in wild living, and then became destitute and was eating with the pigs.
Mm-hmm.
But came home
Mm-hmm.
When he realized that his parents' workers were eating better than he was.
Mm-hmm.
And his older brother became very jealous of the whole situation.
Mm-hmm. All right, you got it, Sue. Yep, everyone agree? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, we've all heard it. We know the plot, right? And remember, parables are people doing everyday people things, but that in a parable form, it kind of reveals, they might be in an extreme manner, but reveals something profound to us. So, have, any other, the question I had, do you think Jesus called this his parable of the prodigal son? Do you think Jesus called his people together? Let me tell you the parable of the prodigal son.
Probably not.
No, probably not. Sometimes we see in the Bible, like what we'll hear in a couple of weeks, I think, or maybe next week. Next week. The disciples will refer to it by a name, the parable of the soils. Okay. But Jesus did not have a title here. The title that we are so familiar with is the prodigal son, is something that is added by Bible translators and preachers and teachers well after Jesus spoke it. Okay. And it's always dangerous. This is a danger that when we look at titles of something in our Bible, like my Bible here, does not have a title before this. How many of your Bibles might have a title? Yeah, that labels it the parable of the prodigal son. Okay, so we got to be careful that a lot of times those titles aren't ever put into the story, but are common names. Like we'll hear another very common name, the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? That one still is probably more popular today than than any other. So let's take a look at this story. We'll read it, and I'll just read through it. If you have a different version, I have the New Revised Standard Version. I'm going to read through it as a whole, and then we can, as we start to ask and explore some questions about this, we can take a look at closer passages, closer parts of it. But just listen to the story, because remember, that's how Jesus was telling it. This is a story that you want to listen to, and that's supposed to make you think about, oh wow, that's a significant thing. All right. Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the young son gathered all that he had and traveled to a distant country, where he squandered his property in destitute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing, and he called to one of the slaves and asked what was going on. And he replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has got him back, safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' And the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" All right. So that's we're all familiar with that part of the story, right? All right. So what is the familiar understanding of this parable to you? What is the most common ways that you've heard it told to you? I'm just wondering too, it might be familiar to different reasons than what I was taught hearing it as a kid.
I think for years the focus was more the father accepted him back no matter how bad he was.
Mm-hmm.
And then over the years, then I've heard more on the brother not being forgiving.
Okay.
So,
Mm-hmm. For how many of you the parable that you've really heard this taught was about, no matter what you've done, no matter how far away you've gone, you can always come back to God. God will always welcome you back. Yeah, that seems to be the pretty familiar idea. This idea that you can always return, right? In fact, that is such a prominent understanding of this parable that it has actually changed our language. Okay, the word prodigal, what does that mean? Someone put that
I don't
word
know
on
the
there at some point.
definition. I know what it, because I've heard the story, so.
All right. Somebody at some point in time, and I don't know, in my research, I didn't come across. No one really knows exactly when or where or for the first reason, but somebody started calling this about the prodigal and prodigal son. We'll examine that a little, the son part a little bit too. So the most historic and common understanding of I shouldn't say common, but the typical understanding of prodigal is a characterization of recklessness, excessive, lavish expenditure, or giving foolishly or lavishly, a spendthrift. That's prodigal.
Ooh, might be one.
And then there's another definition, one who returns.
What about a prodigal is usually someone who's very good at something?
That's prodigy.
Okay. Not related?
Yeah, I'm not an etymologist. I'm sure there is a relationship because they have a common root, but I don't know the relationship between prodigal and prodigy. Prodigal, the first and historically most the historic definition is about someone who gives or spends excessively, lavishly, foolishly, is prodigal. And then in more modern times, we've come to understand it. They include the definition, an alternative definition of one who returns, and that is shaped by people thinking that's what this parable is about. Returning to God. And so a prodigal is one who returns. Definition. So that understanding is so familiar in culture that it's changed the definition of the word, or added a new definition of the word prodigal to us. So, is an understanding of this parable of the son for us to hear that no matter how far, no matter how many mistakes we've made, no matter how much we've messed up, no matter how excessively or lavishly we've wasted something in our lives, that God still loves us and that God would still welcome us back? Is that a bad understanding, an inaccurate understanding? No, absolutely not. It's a great understanding. But is it the only meaning of this parable?
Never in the Bible. There's always too many layers.
Good. Right. There's too much here to stop and think about. That it's just a story of return, okay, of our own, of story. And that is a good message for us to hear. And so that's valuable. But in this, I want us to stop and think that might not actually have been Jesus's first intention of this parable. And for a couple of reasons. For us, because this is also part of a string of parables that Jesus preaches in Luke 15 that are all about something that's lost and gets found again. Okay? We have the parable of the lost sheep, also very, very, and that's a familiar parable to us because it's the parable of, a shepherd had 100 sheep, but one was missing. He only counted 99. So he left the 99 at home and he goes out and all over and he finds that little lost sheep. I mean, we've seen paintings of this little lamb. We assume it's a little childlike lamb on the shoulders of the shepherd coming back. And also of the woman who had 10 coins. Would have been a purity, a symbol of fidelity and faithfulness in her marriage, and it would have been really important societally, culturally, for her to have these coins that she would display. It's a little bit more kind of hard for us to look for, but the most I could think of it is one time Anna lost her engagement ring and we tore the house apart. And fortunately, one of her friends found it in a box of baby clothes that we sent her.
Wow.
So, it's the story of this valuable key, this coin that was very special and had a significance to her. And she cleans and she turns the whole house upside down, sets aside all other tasks until she finds it, and then she rejoices. And then Jesus tells this parable of it. So in the first two parables, it's all about what God does to find the lost. And then in the third parable, why do we think, why is it that we look at it that it's not the same thing? Clearly, Luke, as he wrote this, compiled this, lumped all of these parables together about God finding the lost and celebrating. So why do we think then the emphasis of this parable is on the son who returns?
I think forgiveness is a big part of it.
Forgiveness, yeah. We like it. We might be able to relate more to it because we've all run off. We know that feeling. But is the important part of this parable, in the parable of the lost sheep? Who cares about the sheep? Although I've heard a good sermon about the sheep in this, but it's the emphasis is not on the sheep, right? It's on the shepherd. The emphasis in the woman and the coin is not on the coin. It's the woman and what she's willing to do to find it. Okay? But we put the emphasis of this parable on who? On the younger son, right? So let's take the emphasis off of that, because contextually, with where this parable is located in the gospel, that's probably not Jesus's first intention for us to emphasize on the son who went away.
So the emphasis is on the father that lost the son?
Yeah, let's put the emphasis then on the father. Okay? I would argue that if we were going to put a name on this, we should put the name of prodigal as the prodigal father. Why do you think we should call it the parable of the prodigal father?
He gave lavishly.
What did he give lavishly?
Well, the son, number one, may not have been entitled to any inheritance in the first place. And the second thing is that if he was entitled to his inheritance, he asked for it before his father even died.
Yeah. What does a second son get? Not much in those times, right? Okay. Gives it to him, or he's dead. Yeah, that seems pretty lavish, excessive, foolish.
It was very against the culture at the time, too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, still kind of is. I know some people that have done that, but in general. But still, until the person dies, the money is theirs, not something to give.
Yeah, I mean, and we've heard, or you can preach or teach about, that would have been, you're dead to me. Basically, the son saying, you're dead. You and I are no longer going to be in a relationship. Okay, so yeah, that was a very lavish and foolish act. Okay, what else? How else was the father?
Well, welcoming him home after he was dead to him.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty lavish. Plus throwing the party.
Yeah.
Big party.
Didn't even let his son get his rehearsed apology and repentance and stuff out of his mouth, right? Before he's like, shut up, you're alive, get the calf, get the party started, right? Very lavish, very excessive, very generous in how he welcomed the son back.
Full of compassion.
Full of compassion, yeah. Saw him while he was far off. So Father was looking, right? He was keeping his eyes out on the horizon for a familiar figure. He was spending his time, his attention was given to, is he going to come back? I want him to come back. I hope he comes back. Running out to get him. Yeah, lots of that. How else? Where else is the Father generous, prodigal here?
But I know I've heard something about that fatted calf. It was a special one for a special,
Yeah,
not
that
definitely for this, but maybe for something else.
Yeah, there's
Pull
been
that sooner, possibly.
there's been talk that that could have been then what would have been their sacrificial animal. That would have been their best. They would have identified this calf. This animal is our best, our very best animal. So that might be something that we would then deem sacred, would be part of our sacrifice to God, something we're going to get.
Calf, not
right.
just
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was clearly special, and offered to the Son coming back. You could argue that the fatted calf could be could be Jesus there, something sacrificed for one who was a sinner. Well, who else was the Father generous with?
He invited the brother to come to the party.
Mm-hmm.
And he also told him that, can't you see, you've been with me the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And he was not, it didn't appear as though he was maybe disappointed but not angry with it. His other son he loved as well.
Right. All that I have is yours. You are with me always. And everything that I have is yours. Yeah, he's given the son who remained everything that he had to give. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in many ways, this is a story about how lavish, excessive, generous, perhaps foolish the Father is with his sons and his life. How does that make you feel or think about when it's pretty clear, when we know, if we're going to look at this parable in this way, the Father is supposed to represent God here, right? Do you all agree with that? We're going to assign roles.
Sure.
How does it make you feel that to hear us talk about it being God is prodigal, is a prodigal?
So what definition are you using for prodigal?
I'm using the characteristic by profuse or wasteless expenditure, generous, lavish, foolish giving and spending.
Well, some of those are contradictory. You can lavish, expensive, and foolish. Being lavish or doesn't necessarily mean foolish. So I don't know if you can.
I'm just going by these are the words how they define the words.
Yeah, somebody lavish, somebody's going to say that's foolish.
Somebody's going to say it, but doesn't mean
it
is.
God is very lavish.
Well, let's stop and think in here. Who thinks that the Father was foolish in this parable? There is one particular person in this parable that thinks the Father was very foolish.
Oh, yeah.
The oldest son, right?
Right.
So from his perspective, the Father's lavish generosity to the Son, both in giving what he gave to start with and welcoming him back, were foolish.
Such a huge feast, dancing and music and fatted calf. Not just a welcome,
So
glad you're back.
it prodigal all depends also on perspective. Whose perspective are you looking at here?
In this parable of the woman with the coins, is the woman, who does she represent?
God.
Okay. Right. So these are all about God losing.
Yes, that is a because there is a line here in 12, verse 10, that says Jesus gives a brief explanation of the first of these parables, saying, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. So he's talking about God is the one looking for somebody who is lost, or something that is lost, that is valuable and important. And how does God respond to that? With something that belongs to God, which in our Christian faith, we say the earth is the Lord and everything in it, and we are God's. We are created in the image of God. We belong to God, and through sin, we are separated. We are lost. And we're hearing Jesus talk about God isn't content with that situation.
He loves us. He's caring.
Right.
And if our kids took off and we didn't have them, we'd be grateful to get them back, even if we'd want to swat their bottom.
Right. Right. So, yeah. So in all these three sets of parables in Matthew and Luke 15, which go ahead and read all of them, parable of the lost sheep, parable of the lost coin, and the prodigal, all focus on a character who has lost something and it's found, and how they respond, how they might, and what do they do to get that back. Now, there's not as much effort put into getting it back in the parable we're looking at as it is in the first two parables, but there still is this idea there's something that was lost that has been returned, and there's gonna be a big party about it. Okay?
In my Bible, they have the lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost son.
Oh, okay, instead of calling it prodigal. All right, so there's a biblical editor that's like, yeah, we got to get rid of this prodigal son and prodigal thing here.
Probably trying to draw a parallel between the two.
Is there a part, so it is easy to, looking at this and using that word prodigal, and I'm using it because that's how we most often have heard it. There is that sense that the Father is very generous and very lavish and very loving and very open, but also there's that there's a connotation of that it can be viewed as foolish. The Apostle Paul writes in 1 Corinthians, he says, we won't go and take a look at it, but 1 Corinthians, the first chapter, Paul writes that we are God for some unknown, reason, I'm paraphrasing, some reason known only to God, God has chosen to us to be the messengers of the good news of Christ. And to many, this sounds like foolishness, but the foolishness of God is greater than all of human wisdom, and the weakness of God is greater than all of human strength. So there are many things that if we stop and take a look at how God, our relationship with God and humanity, that we might say from human's perspective seems very foolish, but yet God chooses it anyway. Okay? Are you guys okay with that idea of calling God foolish with his love? Okay.
I think it's just referencing the enormity of his love. Now, you could consider the Father foolish because of the partying son who blew his everything.
Mm-hmm.
His motivation was he wanted to eat. His motivation wasn't that he was feeling guilty, according to the story.
There was some of that, yeah.
And so the son does apologize for sinning against his father and against God, heaven. But it seems his primary motivation leading up to that is the fact that he was starving and wanted some food.
He messed up.
And it might very well go out and do it again.
Yeah. That's a great idea. Yeah, that does say. I mean, he's hungry. He's starving. He's in distress about his own life, and he thinks. But there's also an acknowledgement of how has my Father treated people in my position. He makes sure that everybody who's working in his field is fed.
Mhm.
And that's not how I'm being treated now either. So there is somewhat of, I didn't realize what I had.
Right.
I didn't realize what it really meant to be loved, or didn't realize what it really meant to be respected and valued as a human being by somebody else. But yeah. But Ted brings up another really good point here. Because we do it, right? We could probably all put ourselves into this story because that, at least I know. I mean, psychologists, we all, and theologians, we all talk about, you're going to go through a rebellious phase, right? Did any of you ever try to rebel against your parents? Maybe not, No. I think we all have, at some way or another, rebelled against, and it's actually psychologically healthy to rebel against your parents. You got to separate, a little bit there, and I laugh because I just humorous that one of the ways that my son, that Jonah chose to rebel was to be a Seahawks fan. Which he has now come back and says, Dad, I will never be a Vikings fan, but I wasn't really a Seahawks fan. I understood that.
Even hairstyles and makeup, as I always say when I talk to parents now that are dealing with teens.
Right.
Just trying on costumes to see which one fits.
Mm-hmm.
Let them go through that.
How many of you have rebelled against God? I mean, when I went to college, first time in my life, I didn't have parents driving me to church. I went to church every Sunday. Still go to church every Sunday. No. But, when I was 18, I was at UW Platteville. And the Methodist church was half a mile down this road. Would have had to walk, didn't have a ride. I went to church once or twice my freshman year, didn't, it was great. It's about as wild as that rebellion got. By sophomore year, I was like, man, I need to go to church. But we've all done it. We've all in some way or another rebelled against God. Or have found it, maybe not intentionally, not like setting out, I'm angry, I don't, whatever, we find ourselves off in a field somewhere going, how did I get here? We've all done it. And we've all experienced being welcomed back, right? And then there we are in the field again going, I'm here again. So Ted's absolutely right. We have no reason to believe that this son would never have gone off and done his own thing again, right? Father would have, but what do you think the Father would welcome him back again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely. Is that wise?
Yep.
Gretchen's gonna say yes.
Yeah. I mean,
But the world, some would say it's foolish. There are parents
Okay,
that
I'm
have
so
saying
said
other
everyone-
people would say it's foolish, but I'm not saying, but I mean, you have to look at it at different perspectives.
Mhm.
I mean, sure, somebody else will say it's foolish, but somebody else will say it's not. I mean,
Right.
Don't we all know
it
parents
depends
that
on
cut off
what
kids?
you think it is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And if you believe that that's the way I believe, that this is the God that we worship and serve, then I don't think it's foolish.
You think it's who
I think
he
it's
is?
who he is, and I think it's very wise.
Mhm.
So
The foolishness of God is greater than all of human wisdom, is what the Apostle Paul says. So absolutely. But yeah,
Now,
we all hear, go ahead.
one could argue that the father doesn't have to throw such a lavish party. He could just welcome his son with open arms, warm hug, give him food, and
send them out to work in the field.
yeah,
Right?
you're always welcome here.
But God is extravagant in his love. And I think that is part of it, over and beyond what we can even imagine.
Right,
Mhm.
and we should be grateful for it.
Well, that's our part, but
Yeah.
we're talking about who God is.
Yes.
Yeah.
God can't help God's self.
No, right, he is what he is.
And again, from our perspective, that's foolish. How many times are you going to welcome him back? A second chance? A third time? But let's be honest. Jesus has to call out and say, how many times do I have to forgive my brother? 7 times?
Okay, so what you're saying is, from our perspective as a human, we wouldn't do that.
Most of the time.
That's what you're saying.
The
But you're not
human-
saying,
right.
but it's really not that God's foolish, it's that our thinking is off
Right.
kilter.
So who do you think, with that, if we stop and we think, why is Jesus telling this parable? Who do you think he's telling this parable to? And for what purpose? Is he telling it to people who are going to run off and party and they need to know that they can come back? Or who do you think Jesus is trying to get a message across to?
Well, it says the audience in verse 1 was the tax collectors and sinners and the Pharisees and teachers of the law.
Okay.
There you go.
So everybody. There's something in this parable for everybody, right? But who do you think went away from hearing this parable going, crap, I have to change? Do you think it was the sinners and the tax collectors? Pharisees. Yeah. Who would have thought the Father's being exceedingly foolish here? If there was going to be a Pharisee in this parable, who do you think they were? The older brother. Who had been there with God, with the Father, working the field. How many of you have thought, I have, or heard people, I have been faithful to God my whole life. And somebody who goes off and cheats on their wife and, files bankruptcy, whatever. They've been pulled over 15 times for DUI. Whatever these things are, and they've never gone to church before, but I have been in church. I have gone to church every day because my parents dragged me, and then I even went when I was in college, I've always gone to church, and I go there every Sunday, and and this person shows up. God welcomes them just and gives them everything that I thought I was earning for myself, that I deserved, right? How many of you know that? Have you felt that in your faith, in your life, if you looked at someone else? How many of you have heard that expression before? Someone expressed that?
Well, it kind of goes back to the parable of the people who got the wages, and some of them worked all day.
Right.
Right.
And the ones who didn't work all day still got the same
Mm-hmm. So Jesus reuses a lot of themes in there, right? And what is it? And that one was too. The landlord, I can do whatever I want to do. This is mine to give, right? So yeah, Jesus is definitely. This is in this parable there's an offering of hope to those who are lost, and there is an offering of. You need to take a look at yourself for those who think that they are privileged. Right? So, this parable is a parable about prodigal sons too, because the sons are very, can be called very foolish and in how they spend what God has given, or the Father has given them, right? It's obvious in the first son, given this great inheritance, and he just goes off and wastes it, spends it. But how is the second son, or the oldest son, also foolish with what he has?
He's not grateful.
He's not grateful. Not
Angry and
great.
jealous, I think he was. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's not fair.
Yeah, yeah.
Ask any
Not
firstborn, we all know what that feels like. I had to wait till I
As the
was
youngest,
12.
everyone thinks that we
Yeah,
get the
yeah.
best.
Well,
I
that's-
don't know.
I more or less got told that by my oldest, and I said, well, in the period of 10 years, I think we learned a little bit
Yeah.
of parenting.
Yeah.
I had to wait till I was this age, my brother got to do it when he was.
Yeah.
So if we think about this, if the father gave both sons everything that he had to give, and he gave it very generously and lavishly. The first son squandered it. The youngest son squandered it, wasted it. That was foolish. The older son felt resentment, wasn't thankful. What did the younger son do with it? With what the father was giving him?
Wasted it
How?
by what we see as foolish living.
No, that was the younger
Oh,
son.
I thought you
How
were
did
talking
the
about-
older son use what was given to him by the father?
We don't know. I mean,
He
as
didn't
far
accept
as,
He didn't accept it.
huh?
He didn't accept it. Did he really value it? He resented it. It built resentment
Yeah.
in him.
Been working like a slave,
Mhm.
never disobeyed, never given me even a young goat. I can celebrate with my friends.
Yeah.
I'm sure the dad did something, you know.
Oh, you never had to worry about
Yeah.
whether or not you were loved. You were with me. You knew me. I talked to you about plans, what we were doing. To many ways, that sounds exactly like what contextually, I'd say Jesus is speaking to the Pharisees, to the Jews. Part of the Gospel of Luke, if you just understand the larger context, Luke is writing to a more of a Gentile audience, a non-Jewish audience, whereas the Gospel of Matthew is writing to a much more Jewish audience. Luke is trying to appeal that there's this tension between Jews and Gentiles. And Jews, you need to look in and be willing to welcome these Gentiles in to Christianity. That's one sense that there's a challenge there for those of us who are who have spent our time on the inside of the circle, as those who have known grace, who know the Father, who know God. There is an element here of the oldest son, of all of those of us who show up on a Thursday afternoon for a Bible study. Guess what? That puts you into the older brother category. Okay? Because the younger brother category is they're not showing up on a Thursday at noon. You are the people who, you're here. You know God. You're not far away from God right now. Okay? You're the ones who, and God is with you. God is blessing you. God says as a father, all that is mine is yours. The fullness of my kingdom is right here for you. How do you respond to that? How do you use that relationship is a challenging question in this parable. Are you wise with that, or are you foolish with that? Because the older son in this parable is most certainly foolish with it. It bred a sense of superiority and resentment. He was not great. There was no sense of grace, or he was just all I want It's all
But
about
jealousy
me.
does that.
Jealousy and yeah.
And how would he have known if he really did spend the money on prostitutes? It could have been just his being nasty, at it too.
Yeah.
But if you hadn't seen him and didn't talk to him, you know what I'm saying? He could have been making that part up too.
Yeah.
Making it up,
Yeah.
saying,
Well,
It's
I
just-
mean,
just
in
a
today's
drunk.
world, it would be a lot easier. I mean, we could rewrite this parable that and just mention that, the father, that the older brother, remained friends with the younger brother on Facebook.
Yeah.
You could see all his social media
Yeah,
postings,
right.
So we could track that, but yes. There is a good message for us that when we find ourselves far away from God, we can always come back. And God's probably not even going to wait to let us get our little speech about how sorry we are out of our mouths before, just wrapping his arms around us and celebrating that we are back, even just for that moment. But it's also a powerful challenge to us as we sit in the presence of God. How do we spend that? Because far too often, those in the inner circle choose to be rather foolish with it. From a Christian perspective, they are foolish. From God's perspective, they are foolish. And this is what Kathy was saying. There's been a lot of more emphasis on preachers to preach about how the older son is the prodigal son, it's the foolish son, because he does nothing with God's grace and God's love. He does nothing with the inheritance that God is offering, except get angry and jealous and want more. This is mine. In America, the statement, the most segregated hour where in America, where we are separated into homogeneous social groups, is Sunday morning at 10 a.m.
Yeah.
Just look. I will be honest. The demographics of our community are not as white as our congregation's demographics. Not too far. I mean, northern Wisconsin is tough, but there are a lot, and there's a pretty good population of Hispanic people in the Northwoods. And do you see them?
At your rummage sale?
At your rummage sale? You see them? You see them?
Here.
I mean, they're here, but I don't even know if
You see them when they're working.
And working, hard
Yeah.
working, yes.
Now, there are challenges just in terms of racial, but that's northern Wisconsin, but it's still true. How many times, or what has divided our church? The Methodist Church right now is all about human sexuality. If you don't understand sexuality as the way that I do as the older brother, then out you go, right? We'll break fellowship. You're dead to me. It's foolishness. That's foolishly using God's gifts to us, right? If we use them to exclude. Mm-hmm.
Very early in our Stephen ministry, I think we had completed our training, and there were 12 of us at that point in time, plus Holly and Gary Cole were our leaders.
Mm-hmm.
There was a young man that started to attend our church and requested a Stephen minister. This young man, you would say if he was in high school, which I remember when he was, he would have been labeled emotionally disabled. In special ed, you've got different
Emotional
levels of
and
cognitive
behavioral,
problems. This guy's got emotional problems, significant. And he started attending our church, and he requested a Stephen minister, and I believe Bill was his Stephen minister.
It's not.
Huh?
Keep going.
Anyway, and the Stephen minister would get together once a month and to discuss how to deal with certain situations. And not by name, but his situation came up, and we talked about how, as a Stephen minister, you should deal with this young man. And we, as a group, I think pretty much reached consensus that we should be like the father in this parable.
Mm-hmm.
Have open arms and welcome him to our church and help him fulfill that destiny.
Mm-hmm.
But this young man had an abrasive personality, and it caused us to stretch our thinking. It was I think it was good that we had to go through that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Ted, for sharing that. That is a challenge, and that leads me right to the last question that I wanted for us to think about in this parable. That as Jesus is telling this to us, and we hear it, in this parable, who do you think Jesus wants us to emulate?
Yeah.
Father. So Jesus is telling this. We all said earlier, clearly the parable is the God is the Father in this story. Yeah, and Jesus is saying, be like God. Try not to be like the first son, the oldest son. That's not not good. Try not to be like the younger son, but I know you are, and you're welcome back. But for us here today, if Jesus was telling okay, so who are you going to be like? Be like the Father. Be, by human standards, foolish and extravagant and lavish with God's love. Give it out. Love that person. Pour it out. Get rid of it. Because, that's what the Father does. And welcome back anyone. Okay, so really, as I said, we should perhaps call this the prodigal father. Well, thank you guys. Great discussion. Interesting. If you think more about it, read more about it, and you have other thoughts, questions, please don't hesitate to say, hey, I was thinking more about this, and maybe I don't agree with something that you said here. That's fine. Let's we can continue those conversations, and but next week we'll gather here next Thursday at noon, and we'll be looking at the familiar parable of the parable of the sower and the soils in Matthew 13. Okay.